on the projects that are using remote viewing to look into our immediate future, the year 2030 and beyond. There's a lot of focus on the year 2030 right now for a lot of reasons. United Nations has identified that year as when they hope to have implemented the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You may have seen in some of the other videos that I've offered my feeling about those goals. The goals themselves, I think, are worthy goals. The devil, you've heard, is in the details of the fine print of how we achieve those goals. And when you look at what is proposed to achieve those goals, it is horrendous. I cannot support it, and I will not support it. Not only will I not support it, I will work to find new ways to achieve those goals without causing the suffering and without the loss of so many of the values that we cherish as individuals and societies that must be compromised to achieve those goals. But they're all focused on this year 2030. So when we talk about remote viewing, I think most of you are familiar with remote viewing. If you're not, briefly, it's an intuitive process where an individual is able to travel, or sometimes what they call project conscious awareness along a timeline to a point in the past or anywhere geographically in the present or into the future to give us insights into what might be happening. So let me be really clear. I think remote viewing is valid. I've toured with Russell Targ. I was privileged to tour with Russell Targ in the past, one of the founders of remote viewing through Stanford Research Institute, SRI, back in the 1970s when he founded that project. And others, it is a valid phenomenon. Here's the thing. Remote viewing, I think, is very valid in the present moment, where an individual can be at one location, one place, and one time and project their consciousness in this present frame of time to another geographic location on the earth. This is what the U.S. military was using remote viewing for during the Gulf War, the first Gulf War in Iraq, 1990-91. They were using remote viewers to find Scud missiles in the Iraqi desert to pinpoint those locations so they didn't have to risk the lives of military men and women going out to verify that the Scud missiles were actually there. And it worked. It was a very effective way for them, a high success rate, so it worked. Here's where we run into problems. And this is where this question, well, I think this is an important question. When we're projecting our consciousness forward in time, what we're doing is intuitively we are projecting our awareness along a timeline, and that timeline is moving from our point forward. Einstein had no problems with time either moving forward or backward. Forward or backward. So we're looking forward in time, okay, to the year 2030. And what a lot of the remote viewers are seeing is nothing. They're saying after 2030, they don't see anything there. They said the same thing around 2012. We saw this a lot. Remote viewers saying, man, it's the end of the world. I never said that. People accuse me of saying that. I never said that. I said just the opposite. It's the end of a cycle. And by definition, it's the beginning of what comes next. When a remote viewer is projecting along a timeline, here's the problem. That timeline is subject to many bifurcations. Every time you make a new choice in your life, you bifurcate your personal timeline. You split off from the timeline that you were just traveling with your new choice. And then when you and your family make choices, you're creating a bifurcation. When you and your community, when you and your society, when you and your nation, when you and your planet make choices, we are constantly creating these bifurcations. Some are more significant than others.
When you and your community, when you and your society, when you and your nation, when you and your planet make choices, we are constantly creating these bifurcations. Some are more significant than others.
Some are just little, little bifurcations, little deviations that really don't make that much difference. If you stay in the same relationship you're in now and you're in that relationship in 2030, that's one timeline. If you in that relationship and choose a new one, that's a bifurcation. How significant that bifurcation is determined by the choices that lead to the new partnership or the new relationship. And the same can be said for our nation, and the same can be said for the planet. So the danger and the drawback of relying upon remote viewing to tell us what's going to happen and then reacting to that, where people are saying, we don't see anything after 2030, must mean it's the end of the world, must mean there's a big war, must mean it's all over. People get frightened. I know people that are running up debt that they feel they won't have to pay in the next 9 years between now and 2030, or they're selling their family farms, or they're making big life choices based upon what they are interpreting from these stories of remote viewers. So I think remote viewing is useful. It can be a guideline. And if a remote viewer sees nothing beyond the year 2030, I would take that to mean that we're all in for a big change, and we already know that. We're on the road to a big change right now. We're living a convergence of natural rhythms and cycles that our society has been reluctant to embrace, to talk about. Even when I was in school, nobody wanted to talk about it. We're living a cycle of climate shift. It's a natural rhythm, natural cycle. If we weren't here, we would still be living this cycle. We're adding to it, but we didn't cause it. So we are living this climate rift, number one. We are living a natural cycle of economic change. It's coming up for us right now. It doesn't mean that it has to be bad. It's how the powers that be maneuver within these cycles. So we can do really good things, or we can do really terrible things. Is it based on greed, or is it based on love? Is it based upon the recognition that the convergence of cycles opens the door to new opportunities where we can serve one another in really beautiful ways, or we can raise the standard of living for every human on the face of the earth without taxing our resources in the ways that we have in the past? We have the technology to do that. We have the technology to bring electricity to every man, woman, and child in every community, in every society that wants it. Not all societies want electricity, but for those that do, we can do it without burning any fossil fuels. We've had that technology for over 70 years. If the powers that be were serious about eliminating CO2, they would embrace those technologies. They have not as of yet. I think they will in the near future. And this is no secret. We know this. We know this. The key is the third cycle that's converging now is a cycle of conflict. Now, this is really interesting for me. I had the opportunity, many of you have seen the videos, with my dear friend, my brother, my colleague, my spiritual brother, my colleague, Dr. Bruce Lipton. And we were invited to speak at the United Nations a few years ago about what we saw coming in the years ahead between 2015 and 2030. What do we see happening in those years? I shared with them what I'm sharing now and all the graphs that go with it. I've talked about this so many times, people felt like I was being redundant, so I didn't put a lot of the graphs here, but you've seen on these YouTube videos, you've seen me talk about in live programs, you've seen it on Gaia TV, the Missing Links series, you've seen the graphs, where we're living this cycle where the climate change is converging with the economic change that is converging with a cycle of conflict. This cycle of conflict was supposed to peak in the year 2020. COVID happened and shut the world down for 2 years. And what it looks like has happened is that peak has been shifted 2 years until the year 2022. So we are now living this time of peak, the peak opportunity for conflict. Now, when we shared this with the UN, they were surprised. They said, how come we've never heard of this? Doesn't conflict just happen spontaneously? Don't wars just happen when they happen? And the answer is, well, they can, but there is a rhythm. And what we see is there are 56-year cycles, there are 17.7-year cycles, and many of these cycles are driven by our relationship to the sun, interestingly enough. Now, for some people, that sounds pretty out there, but I tell you, the U.S. military is really on board with what I'm sharing with you here. And the Institute of Heart Math has done a lot of the research showing us that the cycles of the sun influence magnetic fields of the Earth. Cycles of the sun are driven by the ebb and flow of the sun's magnetic fields. There are many magnetic fields on the sun. That's what the sunspots are. Each sunspot is a magnetic field. It's a little magnetic disturbance. And when those magnetic fields are strong and the magnetic fields of the Earth are strong, we are less aggressive. We are more cooperative. This happens in your family, in your relationships. This happens in your workplace, happens between nations. We are much more willing to work together and cooperate to solve our problems. When the magnetic fields are weak, the opposite of all that is true. What's happening now is we are in a relatively weak magnetic field. We're in between solar cycles. We are now in a new solar cycle ramping up to a peak, but we're still at a low point in the current solar cycle. And those solar cycles also influence climate change as well. So we are living a time where we are vulnerable. We are susceptible to conflict, but it doesn't mean we have to be driven by these cycles. If we're aware of them, if we know that these are happening, then we can use these times of vulnerability as opportunities for peace and cooperation. And what the cycles show very clearly is that the greatest periods of conflict, as well as the greatest times of peace, the greatest opportunities of war and the greatest opportunities of peace, come at the peaks and the valleys of where we are with the solar cycles and conflict. So you can see that the beginning of World War I, beginning of World War II, the end of World War I, the end of World War II, all of those are at the peaks and the valleys. And where we are right now is we are at a peak where we are most vulnerable. We can get through this year, 2022, we begin to go down to become less and less vulnerable. So what this says to me, and this is what we share with the UN, if you know you're in these cycles, and you are conscious that these cycles may influence choices that we make, and that is the opportunity to do a number of things when it comes to conflict. And this is true for you and your family and the people you share your home with, under your roof, and your most intimate moments, and it's true between nations. When we're in these cycles, it's an opportunity to become even better listeners, to listen, to give the other person, the other party, the benefit of the doubt, to extend the olive branch of peace, knowing that we are vulnerable to these cycles. And as I said, it's the greatest opportunity for peace that we have right now because of where we are in the cycles, if we recognize that that opportunity is there. Now, of course, you can always have conflict. You can always have war and peace anytime. What I'm saying is the deck is stacked in our favor during the peaks, the ebbs and the flows of these cycles. So the fact that all three of these cycles are converging, climate, economy, and conflict, it is a perfect storm, a perfect recipe for change. Big, big change. This isn't the little stuff. This isn't the fluffy stuff. I mean, this is the big change. So I'm not surprised that, getting back to the question here, that a remote viewer looking 9 years from now, looking down the timeline from where we are now, as if nothing has changed, if nothing had changed, I think the remote viewer would see the world and what we could expect. The fact that they're seeing nothing says that there is a big change, and there are ways, there are techniques in remote viewing to navigate those bifurcated timelines, and there are some good remote viewers that have learned to do that. Some of the ones we're seeing on YouTube, I don't know that that's the case. I don't know that it's not, but I don't know that that's the case. And the fact that they're seeing nothing, publicizing that, people are frightened by what they read into that. And that's why I wanted to answer this question and share this with you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. It could be the end of that timeline. And the choices, man, we're making choices right and left today. The choices that we're making are causing the bifurcations that lead us away from that timeline.